Hi, it's Ian Brody here with a short video on how to use customer insight mapping to really build deep understanding of your potential customers, your potential clients, understand what's important to them, what's going to motivate them to hire you, and so improve your marketing. Now, this is a companion video to Danny and his Naked Marketing Manifesto, and in that, Danny says that you can't make yourself irresistible to your ideal customer without knowing exactly who they are and what takes their breath away. Lovely way of putting it, and that's very, very true. But it's more than that as well. That deep understanding of your customer also, as well as helping you understand what they're looking for, helps you understand how to communicate with them better. My experience over the last few years has been that the biggest problem we're now facing in marketing is not that we can't find our potential customers and find our clients. You know, we have more data than ever before. There are more channels available than ever before to reach them. The problem is that people are so bombarded with marketing messages that they're just not listening anymore. They're just not paying attention. We got very good at filtering out all these marketing messages. Now, you've got a couple of choices if you want your message to get through. You could try, as this lady on the picture is doing, just to shout a lot louder, and in a marketing sense that would be pumping more and more money into fancier and fancier, louder advertising, or on the web having one of those awful websites with the huge red headlines with all sorts of ludicrous claims. Or you could go down the route of communicating in a way that people are already listening out for. It's a bit like when you're at a crowded party and there's a lot of noise going on, you can't really hear anyone talk, but then over at the other side of the room someone says your name and immediately your ears prick up. You can hear you hear your name, and it's because your mind is subconsciously always on the lookout and listening in for things that are important to you. Obviously your name is one of them, but also are the other things that you hold valuable and important. And if we can communicate with our potential customers about those things that they believe are important, then they're going to listen. So there are really two steps to this process. The first is to do your homework. So many of you, I'm sure, will know your customers very well. You'll have worked with them for many years, so you'll have a good idea of what it is they want, need, what's inside their head. But it's a good idea to make sure you've got that knowledge up to date and you've refreshed it. And for those of you maybe new to a market, you've got to do that homework to build that level of information and knowledge. Then you follow the customer insight mapping process that I'm about to lay out for you. And the idea of that is to give you that deep understanding into what's in your client's mind, what's really important to them. And that's going to give you actionable insights. So in other words, useful information and knowledge that you can take action with, that you can do something and change your marketing, your messaging, or the channels you use to reflect. So let's talk about the two steps of the process. The first one quickly, which is doing your homework. Now obviously all of us will have some degree of personal experience through one lens or another of our potential customers and clients. We may have been one ourselves before. That may be the reason we got into the business, because we had a problem and we wanted to solve it, and so we solved it and it became a business for us. Or we may have worked with them for many years. So you've got your personal experience as a starting point. Always a good idea to broaden that experience, and perhaps with a survey. And nowadays I would always recommend very short surveys. People attention spans are so short, we tend, especially online, not to want to spend more than a couple of minutes filling in a survey. But I've made great use of short 3-question surveys just to ask people about what's important to them, what they would value. Then bolster that with in-depth interviews. So if you can get 2, 3, 4 or more in-depth interviews with an ideal potential client or current client, and really drill into what's valuable and important to them, why they may have hired you before, and why they're looking at other competitors. Really drilling in, as I say, into what is important to them, what's behind the initial reasons why they may or may not buy. And then possibly the best way of building that level of understanding and homework is what I call client immersion. And that's really to spend a day in the life of your clients or potential clients. So read the things that they read, go to the places that they go. If you get permission and you know them quite well, you can shadow them at work, see what their day is like, see what problems they run across. You can take that one step further and go and talk to not just them, but their customers. Find out what their customers want from your customers, to see what the drivers and pressures are on them. Quick example of that: many years ago I was working in heavy industry, and we took a group of marketers from that firm out to meet their customers. But instead of just asking them what they wanted from the firm, we asked them what their customers were asking of them. And we found out that a number of their customers were making very tight demands on delivery times that they were unable to meet, and they were missing out on a good chunk of business because they couldn't meet the delivery times. The reason they couldn't meet the delivery times was because the people we were working with couldn't deliver to them, or weren't delivering to them on time. It was a big industrial process, took weeks and months to deliver. Now their customers had just assumed that they couldn't achieve the delivery times that would help them out, but as it turned out, for a subset of the products they could, because they made them to stock. So once they'd built that understanding and they knew that would be valuable to them, they were able to offer that as a premium service, and together in partnership they made an awful lot of money that way. But the key thing is that their customers didn't think to ask for it because they didn't think it was possible. It was only when they asked what their customers were asking of them that they got that level of knowledge. So the more you immerse yourself in your client's world, the better understanding you get. Okay, so let's assume you've done some of that, you've got your personal experience, you've tried to get as much knowledge of your customers as possible. Let's now talk about the customer insight mapping process that's going to turn that knowledge into something you can do something with in your marketing, and then I'll give you a practical example of that. So the process starts by kind of drawing out a little map with a picture of your client, a potential client in the middle. And I've drawn a generic one there. I used a generic bit of clip art, but try and get a picture that you think represents your ideal client. Trying to narrow it down to one individual. Now in your business you may have 2 or 3 different types of customer, so do one at a time, and try and, rather than doing an average, do 2 or 3 of them, do one at a time, and pick a specific person that you can visualize, because that really makes it more real for you. And so flesh them out, give them a name, stick a picture in the middle. Think of what their typical marital status is given that sort of customer. Do they tend to be older, younger, married, not married, do they have kids, etc. What's their education background? What are they interested in? What do they actually do in their daily job? Do they run a business? Are they a CFO? Do they work in the business? Whatever your ideal customer is. And what's their backstory? How did they get to where they are? For my own business, I have one of my types of customer is a guy running a small consulting firm. And so I imagine a guy called Barry. He's 45 years old. He's been running that firm for 10 years. His backstory is he came out of university. He's always been in engineering, but now he runs an engineering consultancy, a manufacturing consultancy. So from that I get a better understanding of that he's one of these kind of technical guys that's come from that engineering background, not from a business or a finance background. So it gives me a better, and that's typical of that sort of person, and that gives me a better understanding of him. And also think through, who do they listen to? Who are they influenced by? Is it peers at work? Is it some kind of outside expert? They really look up to Richard Branson or Donald Trump or someone like that. And again, that helps you get an understanding of them. So once you've drawn that picture of who they are, the next thing to look at is the external pressures and influences on them. So this could be business goals that have been set. So they may want to double the size of their business in 3 years, make more profit, etc. It could be that things are going on in with their customers. The customers are changing, getting more demanding, requiring different types of services. Their competitors may be making big moves. The industry itself may be changing. So this is the typical place where you'll do, if you've done an MBA and you've done strategy stuff, this is a kind of Porter's 5 forces analysis or a PEST analysis, those sort of things. Build yourself up a good understanding of what the pressures on them that are going to require them to do something. And it could be there could also be external regulations. It could be green emissions requirements, all that sort of stuff. If they work within a business, what is their boss asking of them? So they'll have things they'll want to do themselves, but they'll also have goals and targets set to them by their boss. So that's the external side, and those are all the things that you've now figured out who this person is and what's influencing them. So now you can try and get inside their head. And the thing to think about here and sketch out is, what are their goals and aspirations? For this person, what are they really trying to achieve with their life and for their business perhaps? And what are their challenges and fears? What do they worry about? So that's the big longer term things, and then narrow it down to the day to day. What are the problems and issues that they actually face day to day? So those are the sort of things that you'll have picked up if you've spent a day watching them. You'll see that they're frustrated by certain things. The computer system they've got takes ages to load, the CRM system, and they can't find the right customer information that they want, and then when they print it out it doesn't quite work. All those sort of things. Now obviously you're looking for things within the field that you could help them with, not all the problems that they have, so narrow it down to things within your field. But sometimes some of those broader things, the challenge not having enough time, even if you work in a narrow area that's not related to saving them time, you can sometimes find some things about your product or service that can help with that aspect. I remember a couple of people I was talking to who were a law firm, and they had done a big bid for a client for legal services to take over all their legal services, and they'd done this aspect of trying to understand some of the client's real big problems, and their client, the potential client, the problem they had was they had a lack of space for meeting rooms. They were forever running around. These guys noticed that the client was forever running around and having to have meetings in Starbucks and places like that, and it was simply they had no meeting rooms in their own offices. It was completely full. So what the law firm was able to do was to offer them the free use of their own offices because they had plenty of spare space. So that was nothing to do with legal services, but because it really addressed a big problem the client had, they won that big lucrative contract. It was not the only thing, of course. They had to deliver great legal services, but it was a contributory factor to them winning that contract. So figure out what the internal challenges and issues and problems of your ideal client are, and then translate all of that. Firstly, before you do the translation, always think why. So maybe someone's got a goal that they want to earn, $500,000 per year. Why do they want that? Is it because they want to spend it on fancy cars, or is it because they want to pay off their mortgage and make their family financially secure? Those different sorts of motivations will lead to you talking to that particular person in a different sort of way, and different messages will resonate with them. Then interpret that and turn it into, well, if we've got all these things, these problems and challenges and pressures on this person, what is it they would have to know and feel before they would be ready to hire me or to buy my product if you sell products? So start off with what key pain, what key problems do you address, or what key gain, what goal and aspiration do you help them achieve? So note that down. What are the big priority areas of problems you help them solve, or aspirations and opportunities you help them achieve? And then think about the impact of that. So you may help them to double the size of their business, but what is the real impact of that? Will that really impact profitability? How does it hit their personal bottom line? So the bottom line for some people, of course, is in money, but for others it may be more time to spend with their family. It may be just feeling better about themselves and their life, etc. It all depends on what your products are and the individual ideal client you have. Then also think about what they need to be confident in about you and about themselves in order to hire you. So you may be able to solve a problem and double their business, just to use that example, but what do they have to know about you to believe that's actually going to happen? Well, they probably have to know that you have a track record of doing it. They probably have to know that you have done it with businesses just like theirs, otherwise they'll think it doesn't apply to them. If they're a financial services business and you've only done it with manufacturing companies, then they won't necessarily feel confident that it's gonna happen for them. They might also need to feel confident that they'll be able to make the changes required of them. Even if you can do it with other people, will they be able to do it? And also think about what risks they worry about. So is your business too big to work with them, or is it too small to work with them? Have you dealt with their sort of people before? Have you dealt with unionized factories, if that's where you're working, etc.? So try and list out the things that may give them a fear of hiring you, because those are things you will need to address in your marketing and when you're working with them. So that's the mapping process. So you start off with who they are, go to the external pressures on them, to figure out what their internal goals, aspirations and problems are, and then translate all that into what are the big things that they need to know and feel about what you can help them achieve, about them and you, about their fears and perceived risks. That will help you know what messages to use with them to win business. A quick little exercise you can do here, really to get under their skin, and this also helps with the way you form those messages, is what's called the Barroom Exercise. And this is from copywriter John Carlton. And Carlton recommends you think about that ideal client. You're sitting in a bar one day, or it could be a coffee shop if you don't drink, and that ideal client walks in after a really tough day. Now, what I want you to think about is imagine the barman who knows him really well, just looking up at him and saying, well, you look like you need a drink, Barry, what's up? And then imagine what that potential client would say when they unload that problem. How would they describe it, the problem or the situation or the frustration? And in particular, pick up on the actual language they use. So, normal human beings don't say, well, there's no integration between the cross-functional integration between the departments in my business. That may be the language consultants might use. It's not the language business people use. Business people will say something like, I can't get my guys to work together. They're always fighting and we never achieve the results we're looking for. So write it out in that natural dialogue, and that natural dialogue will enable you to describe your ideal client's issues and problems in plain, unadorned English, in ways that so your message is going to get through to them, because if you speak like they speak, then they will listen to you. Okay, so let's go through a practical example of how this works. And this is an example of how very, very often when you do this exercise, you can come up with some very surprising insights that will change the way you market. So this is from a client of mine. Obviously, I've kind of changed it around a little bit to protect the privacy. But my client is a consultant who helps businesses from a certain country, a certain geography, set up in the US, and he helps US businesses set up in that country because he's an expert in how that country works in the business environment, etc. So his ideal client would be the US country head. For people moving to the US, would be the US country head of one of those businesses, and typically that person is in their late 40s, they're married, usually their kids are grown up, they're always well educated, and importantly they're company men. They've always worked for the same company. That's a kind of culture in that country that my client helps people from. And so they're very loyal to the company. They've worked in various functional departments in head office in that company. This is usually their first real line authority role where they've got real responsibility. And because it's over in the US and there's a time zone difference with their home country, often they've got quite a lot of discretion over doing things because they can't speak to the home office every single hour of the day. The primary influences, the people they pay attention to, are partially the local embassy, but mainly the boss back at home when they can speak to them. So that's who they are. What are the external pressures on them? Well, they have always been set targets by the home country, and it's usually to create a successful startup in the US within a certain number of years, and often it's 3, might be 2, might be 5, but it'll be a certain number of years, so we'll take 3 years as an example. And what the head office company is looking for is for them to set up a stable business. They don't want a flash in the pan that starts up, does really well, and then drops. They want a stable business, and they usually set them some fairly modest revenue targets. The revenue goals are not that high. Usually the head office companies are very sensible. They just want to establish a good base in the US. So those are the external pressures. Now, in terms of the internal challenges and issues, here's where it really gets interesting, because when we thought about Eric and worked out, because initially we thought, well, what we would want to do, the ideal messaging for Eric and the ideal services we could offer would make a big success of setting up in the US and to get real rapid fast growth, and then to build an empire very quickly, so it'd be looked on very highly by head office. But actually, when you think about what Eric really wants, Eric really just wants a comfortable job back in head office with a good pension. He's not really interested in running the US business forever. He wants to go back to his home country. He's in his late 40s, so he's thinking, well, 10 years time, I'm getting close to retirement. I want to set this up. I want to be able to make it a success, but then go back to head office, get a nice job, good pension, be able to retire peacefully. So for him, a minor success is fine. If he hits those modest revenue targets, that's fine, because that will get him his comfortable job back in head office. The key thing is he must avoid disaster. So if he goes for broke and tries to get a really brilliant startup that doubles the revenue targets but actually goes under because he's taken too many risks, then that's a disaster for him, because he'll lose his job and he won't get that nice role back in head office, and he'll have to start again from scratch. So Eric is very risk averse. For him, getting a big success doesn't get him a better comfortable job back in head office, or it might get a better job, but he doesn't really care. He just wants that comfortable job. So it's not really much better than a small success. And he absolutely doesn't want to take any risks. He also needs to be seen getting the credit for it. So it's no good if he hires an external consultant like my client, and the consultant gets all the credit for the setup. Eric has to get the credit. So what does that mean in terms of what he needs to know and feel to hire my client? Well, the first thing, the pain that he wants to avoid is a failure. He absolutely needs to avoid having this business set up and then failing, going under, because that would mean he wouldn't get his great job going back. What would be his gain, the thing he's aspiring to? It's really just to hit those revenue targets, but at minimal risk. He really doesn't want to take any risk. So what is he looking for? What does he need to know about my client in order to hire him? He needs to know he's a safe pair of hands. He's going to be able to help him deliver the achievement of those revenue targets without it being risky. And he needs to know that my client understands his risk profile, that he doesn't want to take risks. And he also needs to know that my client will be willing to give credit rather than take all the glory himself. So when we looked at that, instead of positioning the work my client did for Eric and others like him and marketing him as being the guy who's going to get a rip-roaring, fantastic, fast-growing business, talking in that dynamic sense, we realized it was best to talk about stability and security and stable, sustainable growth. And also, when you get into a bit more detail, talking about how the Eric and his like would get the credit for that, and how that would help them build their reputation and be able to make a good impression on head office. So that really turned around the way we were looking at things, and that very often happens when you do this customer insight mapping. You get a much better idea of what it is your customers really want as opposed to what you thought they want, and that helps you do your marketing much better. Okay, so I've described the customer insight mapping process. One quick caveat, I guess, is to say that imperfect action beats perfect inaction. You may have looked at that and thought, oh, that's going to take me quite a while to do. Really the key thing to do is just get started. It doesn't matter whether you do the insight mapping perfectly or not. What matters is that you do it, because whenever you do it, you will get some insight. And the more you do it, the more you use the tool, the more insight you'll get every time as you get better and better. And one interesting observation I've had is that eventually, all this idea of putting yourself in your client's shoes and doing the mapping eventually becomes an automatic habit. Eventually you automatically see what it is your clients really want and need without having to go through the mapping process, because you've done that kind of mapping so often it becomes a natural part of your thinking. So that's the customer insight mapping process. It's fairly simple, but the very process of doing it on paper, getting all those thoughts and knowledge about your customers out, structuring them in that way of understanding who they are, the external targets and pressures, the internal motivations, and then what they need to know and feel in order to be ready to hire you, that helps you put it in a way that you can use to improve your marketing. So hope you found that useful. While you're here on my site, do look around the site, read the articles, the videos, the podcasts. Most of my work is for people like consultants and lawyers and accountants and people who run service businesses, but a lot of it, of course, is valuable to people from all walks of life who are interested in improving their marketing. So take advantage of all the resources you can. If you want, grab my pain-free marketing blueprint. It's got my step-by-step guide into doing marketing in a way that's highly effective but doesn't feel like you're being pushy and sleazy and salesy. And you can get that at www.ianbrody.com/pain-free marketing. Hope you enjoy it. I'll see you all again soon. Cheers. I do love that video. Cheers.